For the past 10 years, I've been traveling around the world by sea kayak, looking at the health of the world's oceans and the lives of people who depend on them. My Ocean's 8 project began in 1999, and the conceit was that by traveling by sea kayak, using them as these kind of ambassadors, we really got into places in a way that we would never have been if we'd arrived by foot or by land, and it gave us access to people whose lives really are impacted by the health of the world's oceans and the changing environmental problems that everyone who lives on a coastline is facing. You know, half of the world's population lives within 100 miles of the world's coastline. So more than 3 billion people are impacted by what happens on the edges of the planet. And what we've seen in 10 years is a trio of environmental problems affecting everyone. Climate change, which doesn't always mean rising seas, but it means more storms, more frequent storms, more violent storms. Overfishing, we see everywhere, and pollution, but particularly plastic pollution, everywhere we've gone. So in the last 10 years, what we've decided or discovered is that the people who live on the edge of the planet actually have much more in common than they have differences, no matter if they're living on the coast of Vietnam, the coast of Chile, the coast of Gabon, or even the scientists who work in Antarctica. In our travels, most of our focus is on the people we meet along the way. It's interesting the perception people have of climate change. For example, in these remote atolls of the South Pacific, this is a culture that really looks only at tomorrow. They're not concerned about next year or 2 years from now, so it's really tricky to talk to them about impending changes like that. It's tricky to talk to them about not throwing garbage into the sea, for example, because their parents did it, their grandparents did it, but of course when they were doing it, it was mostly chicken bones or fish bones and coconut husks. Now it's plastic and glass, etc. So there's a huge educational curve that needs to take place around the world. The other thing is we've met a lot of people who are quite impoverished, and it's really hard to talk to poor people about changing the life for an environmental concern that they can't really grasp yet or can't see yet. On the other hand, the fact that 14 of the 17 largest cities in the world are all built on coastlines, the people are swarming to the coast to live, the fact that there's more storms, more frequent storms, more violent storms is impacting many, many people and making them wake up to the fact that something's changing. Our Ocean's 8 project wound up just a few months ago, actually, in Antarctica. That had taken us literally around the world, and we traveled by sea kayak to every continent. Now we're going to continue telling the same kinds of stories about the relationship between man and the sea. Sometimes we'll use kayaks, sometimes indigenous boats, sometimes we'll arrive by land. Each one will be different. We've already been to the Galapagos, where we made a beautiful film about the impact of people on this very fragile part of the world. Especially interesting in that next year is the 150th anniversary of Darwin's Origin of Species. And we've just come back from nearly a month in Louisiana, where we went down. It was the first film we made in the United States in 10 years. You can't arrive in Louisiana without recognizing the incredible relationship between man and water, because it's everywhere. Bayous, swamps, the big Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, etc. So everyone is related to, impacted by relationship with water. We saw it obviously with the big hurricanes of Katrina and Rita and recently Gustav. But that relationship is very fragile because you also have huge petrochemical and chemical plants. You have a $63 billion a year gas and oil industry, and all of that is impacting these very fragile coastal areas and waterways. So for us, it was a really unique way to go to a place that wasn't so far from home to see real problems. And there, of course, people are more educated and more, they have more access to the media, so they're very conscious of environmental concerns and the impact of climate change on their lives. Well, we've just come back from several months in Antarctica, and one of the untold stories about Antarctica, it's untold for the moment, I think we're going to see lots of these kinds of stories in the next decade or so, is that as the ice disappears in Antarctica, which it is along the peninsula, that it exposes the continent and what's under that ice and in that continent, but lots of oil and precious minerals. So every country that's down there claiming to do science right now, and most of them are legitimately doing science for the moment, they're also testing technology, trying to figure out how they might be able to one day access the oil that lies beneath the Antarctic. What we're seeing in the Arctic right now as the ice recedes is the 5 countries that border the Arctic Ocean are competing heavily and fighting to a degree over who owns what, because they all want access to the oil and other minerals that are up there, as well as shipping rights and military rights, etc. And I'm convinced within the next decade or two we're going to see exactly those same kinds of fights in Antarctica. As the ice disappears along the peninsula of Antarctica, exposing continent, which we all know is underneath lies oil, diamonds, other jewels. There's going to be, I think, big fights amongst the treaty nations that now pretty successfully and pretty happily govern Antarctica. But I think that happy resolution down there is going to dissipate in the next few years as these countries come in and try and fight over who actually owns what of Antarctica. You know, I'm a writer. I'm not a kayaker. I actually kind of run from that moniker of kayak guy. But what the kayaks have allowed us to do is access these communities, these pretty basic fishing communities, and these people who live on the edge of the world in a unique way, and then I get to bring back these incredible stories, and that's really my motivation, is to go out into the field, meet the people who are really living lives out there, and then bring these stories back to share, because so many people don't have the access to them like we do. So in that regard, I feel very fortunate. Ironically, you know, I had intended, I think when I was 15, I thought I'd be a sports reporter, because I could think of nothing better than going to a baseball game, but and have that defined as my work. But actually, it's turned out much better. I get to write about the people who live in the most kind of remote and exotic corners of the world, which is quite a great thing for me.